I'm on a whole new
Today we're going to talk about asteroids, meteors, and comets and their characteristics. So let's get started. Now first we'll start with talking about asteroids, rocking around. Asteroids are large chunks of rock and metal that orbit the sun. They range in size from just over a half a mile, which is a kilometer, to a few hundred miles, which is 100 kilometers in diameter. Asteroid facts. The largest asteroid is called Ceres. Its diameter is roughly 1,000 kilometers. In total, there's about 150,000 asteroids in catalogs, and probably over 1 million with a diameter over 1 kilometer. Small asteroids are more common than large asteroids. They actually are made of the remains after the planets were believed to be formed many years ago. And all asteroids in the solar system put together, if they were added up, would not even equal the size of a small terrestrial planet. Asteroids feature craters. Craters are those little indentions that can be formed on the surface from impact of another rock. They are also traditionally not round. Notice the feature of the craters with the indentions. Asteroids rocking around. Now most asteroids travel in the wide gap between the inner planets and the outer planets. This is located between the planets Mars and Jupiter, and there's a significantly large gap between the two planets. A few stray asteroids can actually run off course, and they can travel in paths across Mars' orbit and cross close to even Earth's orbit. So, why is there an asteroid belt? Well, there are more than 150,000 asteroids, as I've highlighted before, and this was back in 2004. Now, in the image before you, it represents a generic scale of how asteroids are orientated between Mars and Jupiter. Interestingly enough, although these dots presented demonstrate those asteroids, the dots in reality are a lot smaller than the dots that are being used to represent them, and they are a lot more spread apart than this image would convey. Now, the asteroids, to recap, are leftover pieces of rock from when the solar system was originally formed. They are here because they were not able to combine to form a planet. And they're located within that region of space between Mars and Jupiter because of Jupiter's gravity. It stirs up the asteroid orbits and prevents their planet formation. How are meteorites related to asteroids? Well, meteorites are pieces of asteroids or sometimes planets or the moon. They can also, in some cases, be formed from pieces of comets. Meteor, meteorite, or meteoroid. I get them confused. Well, hopefully, this presentation will provide clarity about that. First, a meteoroid is a piece of cosmic debris in the solar system. Notice the image to the right, the meteoroids in space. Next, it becomes a meteor when it enters Earth's atmosphere and begins to glow brightly, undoubtedly because it's being burned as it enters our atmosphere and eventually being burned through the various layers. However, if this meteor is able to survive and it hits the Earth's surface, it then becomes a meteorite. So you have meteoroid, meteor, and meteorite. Try not to get them confused. Meteors, shooting stars or space garbage. Meteors are also called shooting stars. Meteors are small pieces of space debris you can call it junk, pulled into Earth's atmosphere by gravity. There again, gravity is infecting something being in space. Meteorites are metallic rocks broken off from asteroids and comets. So a very important point to note is that meteorites can come from asteroids and comets. Now, meteors fall to Earth at speeds from 22,000 miles per hour to 64,000 miles per hour, which is 8 times that of shuttle speed. In one particular example, shown in the image before, it shows the result of such an impact by a meteorite. From this image dated from October 9th, 1992, you can see that the impact of a meteorite can cause severe devastation, especially if it's unable to be burned up in the mesosphere. Now let's talk about comets, or as I like to call them, the dirty snowballs of ice. Now the term comet is actually derived from the Greek Asteroids, which means long-haired star, a reference to its tail that emanates from it. Now a comet consists of a nucleus, coma, a dust tail, and an ion tail. And it's very important that you're able to identify and distinguish between those 4 parts of a comet. Comets can be seen by us only when they pass by the sun and the sun's heat begins to melt them. The comet's tail is made of material from the comet, gas from the ices, and dust that is mixed in with the ice. They escape as the comet melts. The tail uniquely always points away from the sun due to the solar winds, which is movement of heat away from the sun. So that's a very important point to note about comets. The image before you depicts this tail and how it's lit as it approaches the sun. Notice in each case, as it approaches the orbit of the, or it begins to get closer to the sun, the tail direction is pointed away from the sun. So, how do comets get these tails? It's a good question. Comet facts. Well, they form beyond the frost line. Comets are icy counterparts to asteroids. They have a dirty snowball that features dust and ice that gets burned. And consequently, as this stuff is burned, it creates that tail that we know to be the tail of the comet. Now, interestingly enough, most comets do not have tails. And these tails generally don't show up until they're close to a sun. Most comets, however, remain perpetually frozen in the outer solar system, and only a few actually enter the inner solar system where they can grow tails. All right, so recapping. When a comet nears the sun, its ice can sublimate, which means to go from a solid to a gas. So when it sublimates into a gas and carry the dust off, it creates this tail, and it also creates the coma. So make sure that you pay attention to this image and the various occurrences that happen, and pay close attention to the structure of the comet represented in the diagram as it approaches the solar radiation area, because there might be some questions about it that need to be answered. Now, if I were to encourage you to draw a picture of a comet, it would look like this, where you would have the dust tail going one way, and you would have the plasma tail going another way. And then you'd have your coma and your nucleus. Now, one additional caveat about this is that you must understand that in retrospect, we are looking at the comet from miles away. And these tails that are emanating or extending from the comet's nucleus or coma are in fact very long. and taking it a step further, some can extend for very far. So, where do comets come from? Well, only a tiny number of comets first enter the inner solar system, and most stay far away from the sun. So you're not going to see a tail formation in many of those cases. But many of them are believed to originate from the Oort cloud, and on random orbits, they extend to about 50,000 AU, which AU stands for astronomical units. It's a unit of measure, but it's a long distance, pretty far, pretty far. Also, the Kuiper belts on orderly orbits from 30 to 100 AU and disk of solar system. So these are extended far beyond the realm of our solar system in a region that we're not completely able to see, but we do understand that comets do travel these miles away to actually around the sun, where we're actually able to see many of them, the few that we are able to see. So how did they get there? The Kuiper belt comets align with the plane of planet orbits. The Oort cloud comets were kicked out of the solar system by the gravity from the Jovian planets. So pretty much random orbits. Now, let's compare characteristics of comets, asteroids, and meteors to summate what we've discussed. First, comets, aka the dirty snowballs, are made of ice and have tails. They stay in space. They can orbit the sun. And of course, not recorded on here, but when you look at them, they actually have the appearance of shooting stars. Now, moving on to asteroids. Asteroids are made of rock and metal. They stay in space, although in some cases they might, approach and become meteors, and that's a rare exception, but it does happen if they fall out of orbit. And they orbit the sun. So here you got comets and asteroids sharing a commonality of staying in space. They orbit the sun. Now, we also have meteors. Now, meteors and asteroids are both similar in the regard that they both are made of rock and metal. Meteors represent rocks that have fallen into Earth's atmosphere. Remember the meteoroid, meteors, and meteorite. Meteorites on the ground, meteors are in the atmosphere, and meteorite is as it's approaching. So, and lastly, they have gravity pulling them to Earth, and they burn up as they fall. So they usually burn somewhere in the mesosphere, which is the middle layer of our atmosphere. Now that completes learning about the characteristics of comets, asteroids, and meteors. And hopefully you have gained some new knowledge about these three interstellar pieces of material.